Good morning. So here are a few shilas that come up fairly often. The light's on in the baby's room. Can we ask our 4-year-old daughter to turn off the light? Or young child has a pretty bad rash and they could really benefit from a warm bath. Can we have either their sibling turn on the bath for them? Can they turn on the bath for themselves? Or we forgot to turn off the light in the fridge. Shoshi, can you turn off the light in the fridge? Or you're in a place where there's no Eruv, or the Eruv is down, and we'll assume it's not a Reshus HaRabim Deraisa, it's a Carmelis, so it's a question of carrying Midirabanan, and I really want to have my reading glasses with me in shul. And my 4-year-old's coming with me. Can I just have them carry my reading glasses for me? Or the classic case where you really would want the light on or off. So you take your 1.5-year-old who loves playing with things and I'll hold him right next to the switch. And hopefully he'll do what he needs to do. So these are all shilas that come up fairly often. There are really 3 different tiers, it seems like, from the halacha of obligations that adults have regarding children. And we'll see that one of the sources was in the beginning of this week's parsha. But we'll start from the most sophisticated chiyuv, which is when a child is hagi lechinuch. When a child gets to the age where they can now learn and appreciate, they could be informed of how to do a mitzvah. So at that point, the parents have the obligation to teach their children how to do mitzvahs. That's hagi lechinuch. What is that age? So it's clear all throughout the different mishnayos, it depends on what the mitzvah is. Every mitzvah has its own unique age. When a child's old enough to know how to put on the talis, at that point, he's hagi lechinuch in the mitzvah tzitzis. When a child's old enough to be able to sit in the sukkah without needing his mommy, he could be there independently. He's now old enough, right? He's hagi lechinuch for the mitzvah of sukkah. Generally speaking, the assumption in the poskim is usually around 7 for many mitzvos. But as the poskim tell us, hakol lefi chorpeh. It all depends on the level of development and maturity of the child. So some, when they're 5.5, they could be very on the ball and get everything. They could be a hagi lechinuch. And you could have a child who's 7.5 and they're just not quite there. So hakol lefi chorpeh. That's hagi lechinuch. That age is when the parents have an obligation to be mechanech them in how to do mitzvahs. So generally that means how to be mekayim a positive mitzvah, how to put on tzitzis, how to be mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah. At a younger age, though, where they might not be hagi lechinuch yet, but they're doing something that's officially asur. So even at a younger age, if they're a bar havana means they're not old enough to be educated in how to do mitzvos, but they're old enough to understand that we don't do this, we don't eat that. So at that earlier stage, which the poskim estimate is probably around 4-ish, again, hakol lefi chorpeh, at that earlier stage, the parents would be obligated to tell them, oh, we don't do that on Shabbos. We don't eat that. That's to be mafrish min ha'isr. Okay, let's say the kid, though, is not hagi lechinuch, they're not 7-ish, and they're not even a bar havana. So if they're doing something that's officially asur, there's no inyan whatsoever to tell them, please stop doing that. The kid's 2.5 years old and he's coloring on Shabbos. There's no inyan to say, David, we don't color on Shabbos. He's not going to get it. Nonetheless, there is something called sfinan le biyadayim, which is to feed isser to a child even if the child is a year old, is usr. You can't feed isser. So the classic case of feeding isser is taking something treif and putting it into the child's mouth. However, it's clear from the poskim that feeding isser is not limited to actually giving food that's problematic, but it's instructing a child to do something that's officially usr. So theoretically, if you were to tell the 2.5-year-old, turn on the light, assuming it's Shabbos, so that would be a problem, because he's not Hagil L'chinuch. I can't teach him how to do mitzvahs yet. He's not a bar Havana, so if he was turning on the light by himself, I wouldn't have to say anything, but to instruct him to do so, that would be a violation of Sfinan Le B'yadayim. I'm feeding him Isser by instructing him to do something that's officially problematic. Those are the three levels. There are a few different Gemaras that discuss these issues. Probably the most famous fundamental Gemara is the Gemara in Yevamos, in the bottom of Daf Kuf Yud Gimel through Kuf Yud Daled. Let's take a look together. Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna, Irchasulei, Mafticha debei Midrasha, B'Reshus Harabim B'Shabsa. Rav Yitzchak bar Bisna, this is before they had the tracking devices for keys. He lost the keys of the base Medrash in the Reshus Harabim. So the shul was locked, but they had no way to get in. And he knows they're somewhere in the street. Problem is, you can't go back and pick them up and carry them. Also, the Kai made the Rebbe Pados. So he came to Rebbe Pados to ask the question, do you have any suggestions? Amrle, Zil de Bartle Vitalia, Velitailu Hosam. Rebbe Pados said to Rebbe Yitzchak, get a few girls and boys, little girls and boys together and go for a walk around there, right? Take them out, let them have some fun. Di mishkachi lahu, maisi lahu. And then if they find them, right, they see something shiny and fancy, keys to the base medrash, they may or may not know what they are, but they're going to pick them up and they're going to bring them. That was the suggestion of Reb Padas. So here in this Gemara, we have the question of whether or not katan ochel nevelis based in mitzuvin lahafrisho, which is if the small child is eating treif, is based in is lav dafka based in, but is any yid who's seeing this little boy or girl eating treif, do they have an obligation to be mafrish them from Isser, to pull that treif away from them? So from this suggestion of Reb Padas, it sounds like he's of the opinion that katan ochel nevelis ain't based in mitzuvin lafrisho. What's the raya? Because if he felt that if a child's doing something that's usher, you have to stop them, obviously this would not be a very good eitzah. Lema misayele. And let us bring a raya to this opinion, that if you see a small child under the age of a bar havana doing something that's usher, you don't have to do anything. You can let them do it. We have a brayso that says, Lo yomer adam latinuk haveli mafteach, haveli chosam. You're not allowed to say to a child, bring me that key. All right? You can't instruct them to do hotzah on Shabbos. Ela manicho tolesh, manicho zorek. But you can let them do their thing, and if they happen to be uprooting produce from its growth, you can let them do it. If they're throwing something from the Reshus HaRabban to the Reshus HaYachid or vice versa, you can let them throw it. So it would seem that this brayso is a proof that katan ochel nevelis ain't based in mechuyev lahafrisho. You could allow children to do things even though those things are officially aser. So Abaye said, I'm not sure that's a valid proof because tolesh ba'otzish she'eino nakov. It could be when the brayso said that you should allow them to detach produce, that's talking about, tearing out flowers or plants from a pot. And if it's in a pot, it's not really considered kotzer. It's not considered harvesting from its source of growth. And zorek, and maybe the only case where the brayso says you're allowed to let them throw things back and forth, that's only b'karmelis d'Rabbanan. Maybe it's only in a rabbinic case of hotzah, but not in a shayla v'deraisa. So it sounds like from the Gemara we're willing to entertain that katan ochel nevelis, if a child's doing something that's aser mid'Rabbanan, maybe there Everyone agrees you're allowed to let them do whatever they're doing. And the machlokus is, but if a child's doing something that's officially asur min haTorah, do you have to step in and intervene, or can you allow them to keep on going?
Why does it specify what type of katan? This is katan. Is he what type of katan?
Okay, good question. So the assumption is that even if he's not hagi l'chinuch, but he's a bar havana, right? Let's say he's around 4 or 5 years old, and he would understand if you were to tell him, Jews don't eat bacon, or we don't do this on Shabbos, then you'd have to say something. So this is lachar referring to a child even younger than the age of a bar havana. Tashma, another Gemara says, I want to bring you a proof in the opposite direction. Goy sheba lechabos. Let's say one's house is on fire. We just had actually Rav Vosner, right, who was here with us. He always comes a couple days, once a year. Is he the nephew or the grandson of Rav Shmuel Vosner? Grandson? Yeah, I think grandson. Okay. So he has so many incredible stories about his grandfather, Rav Shmuel Vosner. One story he told me when we first met is that when his grandfather moved to Eretz Yisrael, he had nothing. They came in total poverty. And the first Shabbos that they were there, they had their few belongings in their new home, which was obviously small, and they didn't have much to begin with. Someone runs into shul Friday night after Shabbos already started, and he goes over to Rav Vosner and says, your house is on fire. It's a massive fire. So Rav Vosner looks up from the siddur and he says, Shailev pikuach nefesh? Right? Any concern for human life? And he said, no. So, okay. And he went back to davening. Lost everything, but what am I supposed to do? There's no pikuach nefesh at Shabbos. Leave me alone. Anyway, so let's say one's house is on fire. So, goy sheba lechabos ein omrim lo kabeh v'al techabe. If a non-Jew comes by and he's a good neighbor and he wants to extinguish the fire, you can't tell him, please put out the fire. However, you also don't have to tell him, you should know it's our Sabbath today, I'd rather you not extinguish the fire. You don't have to say that either, because she'ein shviz also aleihem, his shvisa is not upon me. I'm not obligated in the non-Jew refraining from malacha. I can't tell him to do malacha for me, but if he's doing it, kol hakavod. Katan haba lechabos. However, if a child comes to extinguish the fire, omrim lo al techabe, then you have to stop him. You have to say, no, you can't do that on Shabbos. Because shvisaso aleihem, because their shvisa, their yidin, I'm responsible for their refraining from malacha. So Am Rabbi Yochanan ba'osal das aviv. So that would be a raya, l'chora. That would seem to be a proof that when the child's doing malacha, katan ochel nevelis, then based in mitzuvin lahafrisho, then you would have to stop them. So to that, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, that's not a proof, because ba'osal das aviv. He's not just doing it because it's fun to put out a fire. He's doing it for his father. Right? He's doing it for his parents. He knows that the house burning down is not something that they would want to happen. So he's being a good boy. He wants to put it out the fire to help his father. That, lemaisa, no one would say is mutter, because he's doing it for his parents. We have a pasuk, l'tasa malacha ato vincha. That not only is there an issur for me to do malacha on Shabbos, but I'm not allowed to have my child do malacha for me. So even if I don't instruct him to do malacha, but I know you're doing this malacha not for yourself, but for us, for your parents, so then according to many Rishonim, it's an issur deraisa. I can't have you do that, because that's part of my Shmira Shabbos, is to make sure that my children are not doing malacha on my behalf. So the Rabbi Yochanan says you can't prove from there that based in mechuyev lahafrisho, because a child's doing it for his father. What was the case of bringing the kids out to get the keys? So the Rishonim explained the case over there was they're not going to pick it up realizing, oh, these are the keys to the base medrash, and I'm sure all the adults would want them, so we're going to pick it up on their behalf. That would be problematic. The whole eitzah of Reb Padas was they're going to see these shiny, cool things, they're going to pick it up and bring it, and once they bring it within the Eruv, then Baruch Hashem, we could use it. Okay, so we see here a couple of very foundational ideas. First of all, there is a machlogus in the Gemara when you see a child even less than the age of a bar Havana doing something that's asur. Do you have to stop them? The Gemara itself is not 100% clear how it concludes. This happens to be a machlokus rishonim, but we paskin, the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Shin Mem Gimel, that ain based in Mitzuvah Lahafrisho, you see a little 2-year-old boy picking up a roach and looking at it, right, and making sure no one sees before they intervene and grab it. Always a funny thing, right? The kid picks up the grossest thing in the world, and he's like feeling this incredible sense of sipuk nefesh that no one saw me and I could just put it in my mouth. But if you happen to see him as he's doing that, you don't have to stop him. It's treif, no problem. Now you still might want to stop him for what reason? It's gross. Good. Okay. Not any more gross than processed food. Parents are letting him eat chips. This is at least natural. There's timtum alev, right? There's a whole other aspect here that eating something, ingesting something that's treif does have an impact on the neshama. So it's still kedai to stop him, but you're not mechuyev to do so. That's the conclusion of the Rishonim. That's the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Okay, so that means if your 2 or 3-year-old child's doing something that's asur on Shabbos, eating treif, any other example, as long as they're not doing it for me, I don't have to intervene. If they're doing it on my behalf, they're doing malacha on Shabbos for their father, so then you have to step in and say, please don't do that. Yeah.
In terms of that point, but don't do it for your father, is that for the cleanup of the child, or is that because of local Shabbos, so you can't have your animal people on the board?
Oh, so it's not for the chinuch of the child, because we're talking about a situation where the child is not a gil chinuch. It's really included in my observance of Shabbos. I can't have my children, I can't have my animals, I can't have my avadim do things for me. I'm mitzuvah on their shvisa. Okay. Let's do a couple lines together of the Shulchan Aruch and a couple Mishnah Berurahs.
That example is only for the 2 to 3-year-old, but the 4 or 5-year-old would be different.
So once they're the age of a bar Havana, so then you would have to step in, because now they're old enough for that level of chinuch to be able to tell them, we don't do this. That much they get. They're not old enough for positive mitzvahs yet.
And we're always thinking long term. If you tell your 5-year-old, don't do that, and he's just going to be resentful or annoyed, then we wouldn't, right? We'd say all according to the kid also about that.
Hakol lefi chorpeh, and a lot is based on context. Yes, the goal of being mechanech a child is not as much in the present moment. I want to make sure no matter what, he doesn't take out that crayon and color, right? But rather, the goal is long-term, yes. So sometimes the best form of chinuch is halomas ayin, pretending not to see. But says the Mechaber, Shin Mem Gimel, Katan ochel nevelis ein based in mitzuvah lahafrisho. If a child is eating treif, other people are not obligated to be mafresh him from that treif. However, avol aviv mitzuvah liger bo lahafrisho. The father, though, should step in. He's mechuyev to be mafresh him. The Mishnah Berurah points out, assuming that he's a bar Havana. If he's of the age of 4 or 5, he understands that conceptually, I know when it's Shabbos, and then I also understand that some form of writing or coloring is asur on Shabbos, then you have to tell them. Below that, you're not chayav to do so. Continues the Mechaber, ulachilo biyadayim, but to feed them iser biyadayim directly, asur afilu devarim sha'asurim midivrei sofrim. It's asur to actually feed a child iser, even if it's only asur midirabanan. This shaila comes up often when you have a yid who's a nurse in a hospital setting. And part of your job is to help feed patients that can't feed themselves. So if the patient's Jewish and you're feeding treif, that gets complex. Okay? Fine. Let's do a few lines of the Mishnah Berurah here, back on page 2. So the very top Mishnah Berurah, Sivkat and Aleph, Nevelos huadin shari surim. This is true regarding any isser the child's doing. V'chein chilul Shabbos im osa ledas atzmo. And so too with chilul Shabbos, the child's doing malacha for himself. So then we'd say, you're not mechuyev to step in and stop him from doing that malacha. Aval im osa bishvil gadol tzarich limchos biyado. However, like we saw, that if he's doing it for an adult, then you would have to intervene. Now the Rishonim do make a distinction. If he's doing it for his father or mother, that's probably deraisa, because my child is included in my chiyuv shvisa. If he's doing it for another adult, who are not his guardians, there it seems like we paskin there's still a chiyuv derabanan to step in and make sure the child does not continue doing malacha for me. Oh, a good question. That's a good question. The Pashup Pshat is yes. Right, like in the case where they brought the kids to get the keys. So, because in that scenario, their assumption was they weren't bringing the keys for the adults, they were just picking it up for themselves. Once they did that malacha, you'd be able to benefit from that malacha as well. That's what it sounds like. Now the Maisa, take a look here in Sifkat and Gimel. This is about 7 lines in the Sifkat and Gimel. The very last word on the line is upashit. Everyone have that? I'm not getting a resounding yes. Yes. Okay, thank you. Upashit. De'im shama libeno bito akatanim shehei medabrim lashon hara. So here's an application. If a parent hears his child speaking lashon hara, mitzvah ligur behem ulahafrisha mizeh, then it's a mitzvah to intervene and to separate them from that lashon hara, v'chein b'machlokus v'sheker klolos, or any other kind of expression that's usher, getting involved with machlokis, sheker, putting other people down. Unfortunately, we have a difficult time with this. We allow our children to speak negative things about others. And it becomes so much of a habit. This is the way we speak. This is the topic of conversation. To the point where even as they get older and they learn about the fact that speaking like this is actually a really severe isser, it's very difficult to separate from that habit. If this is the way I'm speaking for years and I have no meaningful hadracha otherwise, it becomes almost impossible to separate myself from that kind of speech. Right? So it's important to keep in mind when we're thinking about being mechanech children, higi lechinech, or to be mafresh mina iser, it's not only mitzvos ben adam lamakom, but it's also mitzvos ben adam lachavero, the way we treat and speak about others. What's that? The what?
Would you still say that the parent to his child would be the Raisa, but someone else saying it, that would be the Rabban? Do we still apply that here?
Listen, practically speaking, to give anyone else's children hadracha is always very complicated. Okay? If that's your position, right, you're the teacher in the classroom, you're the Rebbe, that's one thing. But if I'm just overhearing or overseeing someone else's child do something, often the best thing to do is maybe have a conversation with the parent, just from a practical perspective. Okay, let's see. V'da. Teshir chinuch b'mitzvah sasehu b'kol tinik lefi charifuso v'yediyaso. This is what we mentioned. When it comes to the age of being mechanechlim and positive mitzvahs, that depends on their development, their maturity. B'chol davar lefi inyano. Kagod hayodei me'inyan Shabbos chayiv l'argili shmoa kiddush v'havdalah. When they're old enough to understand what Shabbos is, then you should start educating them in kiddush and havdalah. Hayodei lisatev kahalocha chayiv b'tzitzis. And even though we have a minig of putting on a little cute talis cotton on a boy who's 3 years old, it's a Shem, it should take place today. We look forward to the upsharing of the Ackerman Mishpacha. Nonetheless, that's not really the age of Hegiyah L'chinuch. It's a nice thing to do if you want to, but it's not part of the actual chinuch. And this is true, he says, if it's training or educating in a mitzvah saseh shel Torah or a mitzvah saseh shel divrei sofrim. However, to start educating when mitzvahs lo saseh, again, makes no difference if it's an isser min Torah or it's an isser midivrei sofrim. So then you have to be a bar havana, which is even a younger age. What is the definition of a bar havana? Shemevin she'omrim lo sheze aser lasos o le'echol. They understand. It doesn't mean that if you tell them in an aggressive way when they're 2 years old, we don't eat that, put that down. They'll probably put it down, okay? But that doesn't mean they understand that we don't eat that. They're stopping to do whatever they're doing because they're afraid of you. That's not a bar havana, right? So it has to be that they get shemevin kisheomrim lo sheze aser lasos le'echol. Avatinok she'eno bar havana klal, but a child who's not a bar havana at all. So then ein aviv mitzuva lemono bal korcho. Then the father no longer has an obligation to stop him from eating treif, from doing malacha and Shabbos. He has no havana as to why you're stopping him, and therefore that's not any level of education. Okay. Now, he said the one caveat would be, even a day-old child, to feed Isser directly, that's Asr. Take a look at Sivkot and Dalid. Asr l'chol adam, not just for the parent, but for any person to feed Isser to another Jew. Afilu hatinik einu bar havana klal. V'davar zehu Asr min haTorah. This is Asr min haTorah. V'yalfinan la midchsiv. We have 3 different sources for this. One is regarding shratzim, the isser of eating insects. Lo sochlum. V'kiblu chazal the rotza lomer lo sachilum leketanim. That we have a drasha, not only is there an isser for me to eat shratzim, but I can't feed shratzim to ketanim. We also have a second source regarding the isser of dam, of consuming blood. That also we have a drasha, lo sachil leketanim. I can't consume dam, nor can I give it to children. And this is the parsha that we had. V'chein betumas kohanim ksiv emor ve'amarta. We have the double expression in the beginning of parshas emor. Emor ve'amarta. We have a drasha emor legedolim sheyomru leketanim. That we're teaching the gedolim, but the gedolim, the adults, have an obligation to share and to be madrich to children. V'hinei mishlosh mitzvos elu onu lemedim l'chol haTorah kula. From these 3 mitzvos, we learn out to kol haTorah kula, that anything that's asur, I cannot feed even to a baby. Okay. So let's go through some of our scenarios again, and then we'll see the Bir Halacha. So scenario number 1. The lights are on in the baby's room. Can I tell my 4-year-old to turn them off? Or the baby has a rash. Can I ask my 3-year-old to turn on the hot water to give the baby a bath? What would you say in those 2 cases? So the case where the light is on in the room, and I want to ask my 4-year-old to turn it off, so pashib shad, that would be a problem. Assuming a 4-year-old is a bar havana, even if I didn't tell him to turn it off, if I see him that he's about to turn off the light on Shabbos, then I have to step in and say something, right? So l'chora, for me to now instruct him to turn on the light would definitely be usher.
What about a 2-3-year-old?
So a 2-3-year-old, they're not a bar havana. So what do you say in that case? So if I'm telling you to turn on the light and you're turning on the light because you think you're doing a mitzvah for tati or mami, would that be usher or mutter? That would be usher because that's shvisa. I'm obligated in the shvisa of my child if they're doing malacha for me. So here's the Rashba, though. There's a very important Rashba that the Shulchan Aruch does not seem to paskin like, but we'll see from the Be'er Lacha that it is a very, very authoritative shita in the Rishonim, and we'll also explore if and when we could rely on the Rashba, because it could come in handy. So this is the Be'er Lacha on page 3. He's going on the Mechaber where the Mechaber said you cannot feed Isser to a child of any age, even if the Isser is only Asr Midirabanan. V'das harashba v'haran. De'im hatinok tzarech lekach. If the child needs it, mutter afilu lispos lo biyadayim, then it would be mutter even to feed him biyadayim, davar shehu asr midirabanan. Something that's asr only midirabanan. Acha mechaber sosem ledina kedasa chalkim. The mechaber in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention this opinion, and he just paskins like the Rambam and others who say it makes no difference if what you're feeding it is an Isser Torah or Isser D'Rabbanan. Either way, it's problematic. Okay, so what's the opinion of the Rashba? If I'm feeding you, or the application to Shabbos would be, I'm directing you, I'm instructing you to do a malacha, but the malacha is the Rabbanan, and I'm asking you to do it not for me, but for yourself. Or even if it's not for yourself, but it's for your sibling who's also a katan, then the Rashba seems to hold that would not be a violation of Sfinan Le Biyadayim. Now the Be'er Lacha goes on to quote a tshuva of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger is responding to the following shaila. Al davar tiltul hasvarim lebeis hakeneses b'makom she'ein eruv al yedei tinok. Person wants to go to shul on Shabbos, and he wants to bring svarim with him, his siddur, his gemara. So carrying outside, we'll assume it's a Carmelist. It would be an Isser D'Rabbanan of Hotzah. Yesh lismoch bezeh al harashba. Is he allowed? This is the question he was asking Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Can I rely on the sheet of the Rashba, the Isser D'Rabbanan Sfidan Le Biyadayim? The Rashba said that by an Isser D'Rabbanan, you're allowed to instruct the child to do that malacha. So can I have my child carry my svarim for me to shul? So v'heishiv d'za'eno. Rabbi Akiva Eiger responds back, no, you can't rely on the Rashba for this. Dehaharan kasav perakol kisvei lehedya de'afle Rashba sfinan le rak letzarko. The Ran explains that the sheet of the Rashba is only you're allowed to feed a child an Isser Medivrei Sofrim when it's litzarko velo litzarkenu, but not for our benefit. I can't instruct the child to do malacha d'Rabbanan for me.
How do you see that it's only for the child and not the child and the parent? In the Rashba.
We never saw the Rashba inside.
I'm saying from the words that were quoted.
So from the words that were quoted, initially the Be'er Lacha was learning the Rashba like the Ran. And that's why when we first saw this question presented to Rabbi Akiva Eiger, we didn't even understand what the question was. It's so simple it should be a problem. So L'maisa, I didn't photocopy the tshuva of the Rashba or the Rashba's perush on the Gemara. But L'maisa, the Ran is telling us clearly that the whole heter of the Rashba is only when he's doing it litzor ko or litzorich other ketanim, but not for gedolim. One second, maybe we'll just finish off this line here. Va'adarabba machinan biyodeh. To the contrary, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, if you see the child's about to go take svarim for you, then you have to tell him, oh, thank you so much, but please don't do that. There's no Erev outside. Please don't carry those svarim for me. V'yesh tekana, however, concludes Rabbi Akiva Eiger, there is an eitzah. Litein latinuk chumash v'sidr. You could give a chumash and a siddur to the child. Sheyisa lebeis hakeneses letzorech atzmo liyispalel v'lishmo kriyas haTorah. Why is he carrying it? He's not carrying it for you. I want my child to be able to daven from a siddur and have a chumash to follow on during the laning. Umamela yitztaref hagadol imo liyispalel yachad. And once he's bringing it for himself, so then there's no problem of me getting benefit from the malacha that he did for himself, just like the case of bringing in the keys. They did the malacha for themselves, so now we could use the keys to open up the base medrash doors.
Is there an issue in say the world of Rashba that I don't know, there's a lot of issue with consistency in the sense that unless you're the type of parent who never says to your kid, amongst the Torah on Shabbos, don't play with that. Let's say you do say that, and then the kid comes crying and says, "My light is on, I need to go to sleep." Can you then go and say, "Okay, if you need to, you can turn off the light for yourself"? Is there a problem with the fact that you, unless you're consistent all the way through, the mixed messages just, I don't know if it's a halach thing, but it messes up the kid in terms of what's going on altogether, even if they're not completely burned in.
So it's a very valid point. The poskim do speak about doing this kind of thing consistently is a very, very difficult and confusing message, right? And that could lead to sircha. That could lead to a child just not understanding, what's asur and what's mutter. And I think part of that would probably be if you yourself as a parent are inconsistent, you definitely have to use a lot of context and seichel for this kind of heter. And if you find yourself relying on the Rashba every Shabbos, there's probably something wrong. I remember there's a Rashba, Shin Mem Gimel, Berlacha quotes, Tzorko. Yeah, you have to be very careful in how you apply it. But here's the interesting shaila, right? Let's get back to those two first questions we had. The lights are on the baby's room. Is a 4-year-old allowed to turn off the light for the child? Well, turning off a light could even be an incandescent, old-fashioned light bulb. Turning off a light would always be d'Rabbanan. It's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. So, getting back to that scenario, are you allowed to ask your 4-year-old or even 5-year-old, David, the lights are on in the baby's room. Generally, we don't turn on and off lights on Shabbos, but the baby's not going to be able to sleep. Can you turn off the lights for the baby? So it sounds like, according to the Rashba, if there's a real tzorich, the answer could be, yeah, that's permissible. Okay, how about the second case? Baby has a rash and can use a warm bath. Right, so David now becomes your new Shabbos goy. David, come over here, boychik. Can you turn on? So turning on the bath would be a deraisa, because as soon as you turn on the hot water, you have cold water mamish gushing into the boiler, and he's in violation of bishul. So l'chora, you wouldn't have the rashba in that case because he's doing a malacha deraisa. Now there is one interesting potential caveat. And right now, we're just trying to explore academically. Please don't make too many applications, Lamaisa. But you could argue, does David know, let's say David's 6, right? Does David know that by turning on the hot water, what's happening is that cold water is going into the boiling water, and by me turning on the hot water, I'm cooking the cold water? So it depends. If it's David Wilcatch, he probably knows that. Can I know? Depends on the child. If it's one of my kids, they would not know that. Okay. So you could argue, well, turning on the water is usher because it's a psik reisha. Why is a psik reisha usher? And that's a big discussion in the Achronim. But if you take the tzad that a psik reisha is usher because doing A automatically leads to B, and therefore it's ki'ilu a-mechavein for B. It's as if I have intention, that's maleches machsheves, that I'm cooking water. If you have no clue that by turning on the hot water, you're cooking cold water somewhere in the pipes, so then you could argue you're not really doing a malacha deraisa. That's not maleches machsheves. If you're not doing a malacha deraisa, so then maybe you would have the heter of the Rashba. What's that? For many adults. Looking around the room, looking for the most ignorant adult here. Shmuley, come here. Okay. No, it goes straight in. Cold water goes straight in. Generally speaking, we assume turning on hot water on Shabbos would be an Issa Deraisa. It's a psik reisha bishul. Nishtazoi. That's regarding the heater, the boiler turning on. I'm not talking about the boiler turning on. Cold water going into the hot water, that happens immediately. What's that? Okay, so I don't want to get into the hot water sugya. That was just an example here.
Hot water if you did.
Oh, that's very good. Very good. But I do want to point out that there is a very significant machlokes here in the sheet of the Rashba. When the Rashba says this incredible chiddush, lakula, that even a parent can instruct a child to do malacha for the child's sake or for another child, assuming the malacha is a malacha derabanan, until what age does that heter apply? Let's say the child's already past hagi lechinuch. Child's 8 or 9 years old. So what would you say? If a child's already hagi lechinuch, can you still use the heter of the Rashba of instructing the child to do a malacha derabanan for himself? Somebody bring me a raya in one direction or the other from what we've seen today. I have a... Do you have a raya?
No, I just thought that basically if you're talking about the Rabbanan differently from the right, you're giving a child a message that, oh, the Rabbanan is okay, you can do whatever. And for chinuch, that would be very...
It would definitely be a dangerous message to let your kids feel that, it's only the Rabbanan and we don't care that much. Again, this has to be utilized rarely in the right context and the right messaging. But I want to know, in the Rashba, would he say it's mutter even to tell a child to do a malacha derabanan for himself or for a sibling, even if the child is past hagi lechinuch? I think there's a raya.
It's Tino. It doesn't say a katan.
A tinuk could also be a tinuk ben yud gimel shanim. The raya is from Rabbi Akiva Eger. What's the case of Rabbi Akiva Eger? The father wanted to know, can I have my child carry Sidurim and Chumashim to shul? And Rabbi Akiva Eger's eitzah was, have him carry the Sidra and the Chumash for himself, so he could daven and follow along in the laning, and then once he's bringing it for himself, so then you could read along. L'chora, if he's davening and he's following along in the laning, so he's probably higi lechinuch. Well, so we don't have exact ages, but it seems like from Rabbi Akiva Eger, he's applying the chiddush of the Rashba even above the age of higi lechinuch. Now, practically speaking, how do we paskin on this? Take a look here on page 4. The Chai Yodam, when he brings this machlokis towards the very end of that top paragraph, he mentions this shita and he says that I found this opinion in the tshuva of the Rashba. Shenishalazev ayin shah mashatirates. The Rashba gives his chiddush that if the katan's doing it for another katan or for himself, he's allowed to do so. Says the Chai Yodam, ein lismoch al zeh ela litzorich gadol. One should only rely on the Rashba of telling a child to do malacha derabanan for the sake of a child, litzorich gadol. Okay? Only in great necessity. Shulchan Aruch Harav seems to be a little bit more embracing of the Rashba. Shulchan Aruch Harav says, "V'yesh omrim shekol shehu litzorko shel tino kagon achilu shtiya lo gazru chachamim klal." Some were of the opinion that as long as it's for the benefit of the child, Chazal were not gozer. Umutter lachilu biyadayim kol davar she'eni surah ela midivrei sofrim im tzarich lekach. And you'd be allowed to directly give him something that's asur midivrei sofrim, or instruct him to do a malacha that's asur midirabanan if he needs it. Afal pi shehagi lechinuch. The Shulchan Aruch Harav is clear, like our diak from Rabbi Akiva Eger, that even if the child is 7 or 8, this chiddush of the Rashba could apply. Aval im eino tzarich lekach. But if l'maisa the child doesn't need it, meaning, it would be convenient to turn off the lights in this room, but we could also put the baby in a different room, so then that's not called tzarich lekach. Then asur la'achil afilu einu bar havana. Then it would be asur to give anything that's asur midirabanan, even to less than a bar havana. So, getting back to our cases, let's say the fridge light was left on before Shabbos. Am I allowed to ask a child to turn off the fridge light? Anything you're doing for the whole family is probably the same thing as the case where he's putting out the fire, right? you have to stop him. As long as he's a bar Havana or even less than a bar Havana. Let's say he was mamish 3, and somehow he picks up on the fact the light's on and I want to turn it off for my family, I would still have to stop him, because even less than a bar Havana, if he's doing it for mommy and tati, right, I have to stop him. Having a child carry my reading glasses to shul, no heter whatsoever. Unless he could put the glasses on for himself and I could look through the lenses, that's not going to work, right? So having him carry the glasses for me would not be a heter. Oh, so that was the case where you have a 1.5-year-old child and you want the light to go off. So can you hold him by the light switch, hoping that he's going to do that? What would you say?
From the initial Gemara, it sounds like.
So, L'maisa, l'chora, that's mutter, as long as the child doesn't think he's doing it for you.
You could convince him that it's not really for you. No, don't do it.
Oh, so this happens to be a major misconception. The whole idea of remiza, of hinting, that might apply to a non-Jew only in limited circumstances. But there's no such thing as remiza to a katan. The what?
Don't do it.
Oh.
Don't do it.
Little reverse psychology. Just please, whatever you do, don't turn off the light. Don't turn off the light. We had right. So we pull him away immediately.
We're only asking about a 2 or 3-year-old, right?
A 2, 3-year-old. So if it's a 5-year-old, you want to hold your 5-year-old by the light switch, and he's still into that. That would be problematic because he's a bar Havana. You have to be mafresh, so you can't hold him by the light switch. I remember back in many years ago, we took a child to the doctor on Shabbos, from doctor, and he had to turn on the light to look inside of the ear. So he took his finger like this, and he turned it on like that. So I said, doctor, if you're trying to make yourself feel better, maybe that worked. But if you're doing anything halachically, that was mamish nothing. Okay? You could have asked me to do it for you. It's not, right? So you can't take the kid's finger and do that. You can't put his finger on the switch where you're mamish like he's an extension of yourself. Holding the child by the light, l'chorah, be the same thing as taking the kids out to the street. If they pick up the keys because they want to, that's okay. The child turns off the light because it's fun to turn off the light switch. That would be okay as well. So again, these are some of the ideas here, not to take overly lenient, but in the case of a shasat chak, good to be aware of the shita sarashba. Shkoyach.
When does Lifnei Hashem come into play in all of this?
Lifnei Hashem, what do you mean?
I mean, Hashem's always watching, so you're